So I'm Will Smith. I'm the CEO of Euclid. And at Euclid, what we're trying to do is basically what Google and Amazon have been doing online for years, which is making a better shopping experience through data. So today we're going to talk about a couple of things. First is about this explosion of location data that's occurring right now, and then how we can take that data set and turn it into actionable insights that retailers and location and venue owners can actually monetize. I think another thing we want to talk about is that while big data can be a very intimidating topic, it can actually be very simple and straightforward as well. And that's a lot about what Euclid is about. You don't need a PhD in physics to be able to leverage Euclid. It's a very simple way to apply data. And when done right, it can really help drive a better customer experience and also improve the store performance. Wrong way. So this is just a quick snapshot of smartphone penetration in the United States, and I think it's actually higher in Seoul. But what is really exciting here is, as smartphone penetration increases, the data set grows in conjunction. And as we get this data set, we can start to answer questions that were previously unanswerable. Questions like, are my lines too long? Or when do I have lines? Is my marketing working? Do I have enough sales associates on the floor? And these are all very simple, but also very fundamental questions that previously there just wasn't the data to answer. And so at Euclid, what we've tried to do is build a software platform where we have software running on in the Wi-Fi that's sitting in the store. And with that software, we can essentially count phones and start to understand things like how many people are in the store, how many people are walking by, and how long are they staying. And we give all this data to the retailer in an online dashboard. We've been doing it for about 4 years. We are based in San Francisco, but our network is global. We've raised about $25 million, and we're the first to kind of get into this Wi-Fi analytics space. I came to it from a retail background. My family was in shopping center development, and my co-founder was the head of web analytics at Google. And he really wanted to create the same sort of product that he had online for the physical world. And as we started to look at the problem, one thing that really stood out to us was how little data there was in the store. If you were Apple retail, or you were the most advanced retailer, you were lucky if you had a traffic counter, which is basically a camera at the top of above the door that counts pixels as people walk in, and then you have your sales data. And this is a very flat data set. You can't slice and dice it. There's no unique ID. And so most retailers and venue owners were actually flying pretty much blind. And so we tried to figure out how can we start to bridge that gap? How can we start to answer, how are you attracting customers into your stores? What's happening once they get in there? And how can you get customers to come back time and time again? And so what we set out to do was really build, the same sort of thing you have, in the same way that you have a clickstream online, we want to make a footstream offline. So, basically that same funnel that you use to optimize your website, we want to give you a funnel that you can optimize your store. And so we basically look at it in 3 buckets. We want to be able to understand how do you attract customers to your store, how do you engage them, and then how do you get them to come back time and time again and finally purchase. And our metrics basically break down into these buckets. We have the outside opportunity, the walk-bys, the visitors, the storefront conversions, which will tell you, how your windows are performing, and how your storefront is actually effectively converting the traffic that's going by. Duration, and within duration we'll tell you how many people come in for 5 minutes and then leave, and then also how many people stay for 25 minutes and are really engaged. For retention, we look at how many are new customers, how many are repeat visitors, but we can also look at, how many customers visit 5 times or more, how many customers visit only once. And we can do all of this without any new hardware, without running any wires. It's all software. So we've done integrations with every major Wi-Fi vendor so that you can turn on the software with just the flick of a switch. On top of that, we have a free product which makes it a no-brainer to get started, starting to quantify your location. So this is probably the most interesting thing to me. I think what's really cool about Euclid is as you begin to pull in other contextual data. So in addition to our Wi-Fi analytics, we've started to pull in traffic data, point of sale data, labor data, marketing data. And as we look at our metrics in that context, the power of what we can provide a retailer actually really increases. And I think one of the ways that it increases in the most interesting way is that we can actually flex some of our data science muscles that the retailers don't have. We can start to get closer to the answer for them. So for instance, we built a revenue attribution tool where we pull in all of the sales data for the retailer, and then we run the correlations and see what are the key drivers of sales for every single store on any given day. And after we've done that, we can start to say, okay, you should focus on, the retailer should focus for this subset of their stores on engagement because that's the key driver, or they should focus on frequency for this subset of their stores because that's the key driver. And this is something that the retailer could do on their own, but most of our customers don't have a team that's technically capable of actually doing it. So by providing this system, we're actually letting them get closer to the answer without having to have a huge analytics team. We have 3 main customer types. The primary use is probably marketing. We sell to the marketers who really want to understand if their marketing is effective or not. So they'll check to see if they run a campaign, are people coming in for the first time, or were they already loyal visitors? And if it's a promotion, can they get them to come back time and time again, or do they just come in for the promotion and then never return? For the operations, it's really looking at labor primarily. So if, what changes can they make to their labor schedule to make sure that lines are short, service is excellent. And the metrics that really drive this for us are looking at engagement, how long are people staying, and trying to optimize that. And then looking at frequency, because if you have a good experience from a customer service perspective, you'll come back again. Finally, on the executive side, it's a really interesting tool to understand how you're doing relative to your peers. So we have tens of thousands of these sensors out across the United States and across the world, and we can start to say, okay, you have a bounce rate, which is how many people come in for 5 minutes or less, that is higher than your peers, or you have a bounce rate that is lower than your peers. On top of that, it gives them a strategic tool where they can look at the behavior of their entire chain in one easy-to-understand dashboard. So this is just a quick view of the product. It allows you to compare locations, to select any metric. You can slice and dice it 100 different ways. We can roll the data up based on the hierarchy that the location provides us. So if you want to do it by region, if you want to roll it up by concept, it's very easy to do that. This is, I think, one of the most popular views of the product where you can actually see you can look at the whole chain really, really quickly. So this is what we call the leaders and laggards board, where we'll show what are the top performing locations on any given day by our metrics, and what are the bottom performing locations on any given day for our metrics. And what's really neat here is it's used in a very simple way. The retailer will call up their top performing stores and say, what are you doing so well? How can I take your best practices and spread them across my whole chain? And then they'll call up their bottom performing stores, and sometimes it's less productive. Sometimes they're just, they just bang on their bottom performing stores. But a lot of times, actually, they're saying, what happened today that made performance be so low, and how can we fix it for tomorrow so that it's better? Additionally, we have a couple of tools that the retailers use during the day to try and make sure that they're performing well. This is a queuing tool where the retailer can start to say, how long are my lines? And they can set a threshold of what they think is an acceptable wait time. And if they go above that threshold, we'll send a notification to the retailer saying, lines at this location are particularly long right now, and you might want to make some changes. Most of our customers want to see our data next to their key performance indicators. So they'll pull our data into their own BI tools and look at sales next to traffic, next to dollars per transaction, next to engagement, next to frequency. And so we've built a number of hooks and a number of reporting tools that just basically let them get it into their own business intelligence very, very quickly. This is where a lot of people's minds go when you talk about our product, which is kind of the blue dot moving throughout the screen and trying to understand how someone is moving through your store. For us, what's really interesting is not necessarily how the blue dot moves through your store, but how does the whole swarm of IDs move through your store? And what are the patterns that we find? For instance, with department stores, we have a department store chain in the United States where they have their most expensive products on the 3rd floor and their highest margin products on the 3rd floor. And so they look at this tool and try and understand how can they change behavior to get people to that 3rd floor? What can they do from a merchandising perspective? What can they do from a labor perspective? What can they do from a layout perspective to get people to that 3rd floor? And another famous use case is the milk in a grocery store. The milk in the grocery store is always very strategically placed to get you to move through the grocery store in the most expensive way possible. And that's oftentimes how this is used as well. So this is probably the part that I'm excited about going forward, which is our product is a product that has the same unique ID across time and across locations. So for every location we deploy, our product gets better and better because we can start to understand how do locations relate to each other, how do people relate to each other, because we can look at the co-occurrence of IDs, and how do people relate to locations. And so we can really, really start to use the network we have to improve the product versus just having a sensor within the 4 walls of the store. And so for us, one of the exciting milestones is we've hit, actually these numbers are actually higher now. So we're looking at over 300 million unique IDs, over tens of thousands of locations, across hundreds of customers, in dozens of countries globally. And what's exciting for us is, this really improves our benchmarking, it improves our ability to be more predictive and to make inferences about the individual based on where they go. So that is my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions, whether they be technical, product, customer. I'd love to answer your questions, and you can ask them in Korean. I've got a little headset here to help me out.
예, 정말 빨리 끄셨네요. 그러면 Q&A를 엄청나게 많이 해야 될 것 같은데 혹시 궁금하신 점 있으면 지금 손 들어주시면 제가 마이크 하나 더 드리겠습니다. 네, 저쪽.
네, 발표 감사하게 잘 들었고요. 두 가지 질문이 있는데 첫 번째는 로케이션 같은 경우에 하나는 미국 전역에 대해서 그냥 스토어가 어디 있는지에 대한 인사이트를 보는 맵이 하나 있었고 다른 하나는 그 빌딩 안에서 비지팅 패턴을 보는 그런 두 가지가 있었잖아요. 근데 그 두 가지는 사실 로케이션에 대한 스케일이 굉장히 다른데 일반적으로 로케이션에 대한 정의를 어떤 방법을 사용하시는지가 궁금하고요. 두 번째는 와이파이 경우에는 그 인빌딩에서 어큐레시가 굉장히 떨어지는 걸로 알고 있는데 그걸로 어떻게 비지팅 패턴 같은 걸 인식하시는지 그 두 가지가 궁금합니다. 감사합니다.
Sure. So, here, I'll put this down. So we define a location as a store or a mall. Those are our two primary types of locations. We have a number of airports and event venues that are different, but primarily these are stores. The question about Wi-Fi accuracy, and I think this is a really good question, because if you just rely on RF, you don't come up with a very good answer, right? There's multipathing problems, and it's a messy problem. And so what we've tried to do is two things. One, we've tried to build a system where for any individual ID, we might be wrong at times, but we're going to be good at understanding the behavioral patterns of the whole, right? So we're a statistical tool. So we basically, and then to take that a step further, our Wi-Fi partners, for the most part, have done a great job of building great RF tools. What we've tried to do is figure out ways to ingest that data in ways that actually add to the accuracy of what they've given us. So in addition to things like signal strength, which we'll get from our Wi-Fi partners, we'll build probabilistic models to try and increase the accuracy of our data set for our metrics that we're showing, right? So increase the accuracy of what we think is the frequency of customers for a location. And so the probabilistic models will look at, okay, how long did we see an ID for if we think it's inside? How frequently do we see the ID if we think it's inside? And so we just look for any one of our metrics at the set of IDs that we're very confident in, and we don't take every single ID that we count for every single one of our metrics.
예, 혹시 뭐 또 추가 좀 예, 이쪽에.
예. 크게 두 가지 관점에서 질문을 드리고 싶은데요. 첫 번째로 사용자 관점에서는 고객들이 앱을 다운받기를 원치 않을 수도 있고 또 와이파이를 켜지 않은 소비자도 있을 수 있는데 이런 소비자들의 데이터를 수집하지 못하는 것에 대해서 어떤 방식으로 대처를 하시는지 여쭤보고 싶고요. 두 번째로 고객들이 매장에 머무른 시간, 지역에 머무른 시간도 측정을 하시는데 그런 데이터를 시간을 서버에 보낼 때 초 단위로 서버에 데이터를 전송하셔서 시간을 측정하시는지 아니면 어떤 다른 방법을 쓰시는지 여쭤보고 싶습니다.
Sure. So the first question is really about sample size, right? How, of the number of people who walk into a location, what percentage are we counting? I think what's important to note is we don't have a mobile app. We're not getting anyone to download anything. We're just counting people based on the fact that as you're walking around, your phone is constantly pinging saying, here I am, where are you, to the available Wi-Fi networks. And so we've used that to listen for phones. And so if you download something or not, you're still part of our data set. Now the important piece there is because we don't have you download anything, we don't know who you are. We don't have a picture of which customer it is. We can't tie it to anything personally identifiable. To give you a picture of what percentage I think we're counting, in the United States there's the technology of traffic counting inside the store with cameras is really widely used. And so those will give you a picture of what the total number of people in the store are. And we look at that next to our data to try and figure out what fraction of the population are we seeing. And in the United States, in a city like San Francisco, we'll count about 60% of the population for a given location. And in a city like New York, it would also be very high. But then if you go into some of the smaller, more rural areas, we'll be counting 30 or 40% of the population. For calculating duration, I think what's really important is understanding that's really driven by the ping frequency of a phone. And so, we're not very while the calculations are done, we have we're posting to our server every second, but the calculations are being done in a way that is basically plus or minus 30 seconds. So we'll say you were in the store for 5 minutes plus or minus 30 seconds. Much less than that, you can't be very accurate. But as you get bigger, as the numbers get larger and larger, it actually, on a percentage basis gets bigger.
예, 혹시 뭐 또 추가 질문 있으신가요? 네, 저기.
네, 잘 들었습니다. 예. 아까 말씀하신 것 중에 동선을 파악한다라는 말씀을 하셨는데, 네, 근데 지금 현재 말씀하시는 개념은 동선을 파악한다고 보기에는 조금 제가 보기에는 힘들 것 같다는 생각이 듭니다. 왜냐하면 동선이라 하면 움직임을 인식하는 거기 때문에 1번 와이파이에서 2번 와이파이로 움직일 때 1번에서 2번으로 움직인 핸드폰이라는 것을 감지할 수 없기 때문에 단지 동선이 아니라 어느 한 부분의 혼잡도만 그냥 파악을 할 수 있다라고 생각이 들거든요. 예, 근데 동선을 유도할 수 있도록 만들어준다라는 개념을 어떤 식으로 말씀하신 건지 좀 자세히 알고 싶어서 질문 드립니다.
Sure. So we're looking at these unique IDs bounce around the space. The granularity with which we can do that is dependent upon the density of the Wi-Fi network and also the hardware provider. Different hardware providers have different radios and things like that, and actually different feeds to us, which give us different data. But I think what's really important is if you tried to do this in terms of understanding how a little blue dot is moving around the space, you don't get a very good picture. And there's two reasons for that. First is your phone's only pinging every 30 seconds. So it would be a dot that was here, and then here, and then here. So it wouldn't give you the best picture. But then also, the pathing problem is just a difficult one. So we look at the behavior of the swarm. A way to think about it is we're not actually interested in the movement of a bee. What I'm interested in is how the whole swarm is moving through a space. And so we'll look at, for a given location, thousands and thousands of IDs, and we'll look at the behavioral patterns with which they move through the space. And so we'll be able to give the retailer or the event venue location a good picture of how, a crowd like this will move. Like right now, I can see that the majority of the people are in this row and this row, but there's not anyone in the middle. So we'll be able to give that picture well. But telling where actually you moved through here is a much harder problem. And that's something that, we're not selling.
예, 좋은 답변인 것 같고요. 예. 근데 저도 좀 궁금한 게 하나 있는데요. 제가 질문해도 되겠죠? 제가 궁금한 게
Of course.
예, 보통 그 단말기들에 달려 있는 와이파이 칩들이 다 다양하기 때문에 단말기마다 와이파이 신호 보내는 것도 다 조금씩 차이가 있을 것 같거든요. 네, 그런 것들을 어떻게 잘 이렇게 그런 차이를 잘 분석해서 그런 정보들을 수집하는지가 좀 궁금해요. 그래서 저는.
Sure. So yeah, there's different there's different chipsets in the different phones. I think there's you know in a number of markets there's a couple of manufacturers that dominate, so you can get a good picture with just those manufacturers. I think one thing that's important for our technology to work is within the MAC address, which is the the ID that we collect. One of the octets actually tells you who is the manufacturer. And so we can look at that, and we can look at the characteristics that we have for that phone to give a better picture. But in all cases, we always know who the manufacturer of the phone is.
예. 혹시 또 뭐 또 다른 질문 없으십니까? 저기. 저 가운데 계신 분이 먼저 드신 것 같은데. 다시 한번 손 들어주시겠습니까? 가운데.
네, 최근에 그러니까 단말 제조사들뿐만 아니라 그 플랫폼을 가진 이제 플랫폼 제조 그 플랫폼 업체들이 그 맥어드레스를 주기적으로 변경하는 방식으로 단말 가진 사용자의 프라이버시를 이제 존중해주는 그런 움직임들이 있는데 그런 것들이 이제 계속 활성화되면 아마 그 지금 애널리틱스를 수집하는 입장에서는 굉장히 노이즈를 작용할 것 같은데 이런 부분에 대해서 어떤 뭐 대비책이 있는지 궁금합니다.
Sure. So there are the primary manufacturer that is doing this is Apple. They're randomizing the MAC address in certain states of the phone, and it is making the data set more noisy. Our company is built to understand noisy data sets, to try and process and clean up noisy data sets. So this fits well within our sweet spot. There's a couple things that are happening that make it a little bit easier. So when Apple is doing this, they're always doing it with the locally administered set of IDs. So we're able to basically understand when it's a random MAC address versus when it's the actual MAC address. And so we can quarantine the random MAC addresses to use for only the things that we want to use them for. Another thing is the ways in which it is happening. So the random MAC address with Apple, and Apple's the only one that actually is randomizing the MAC address right now, is only sent out when your phone is in a passive mode, when it's in your pocket, not doing anything. If you touch your home button like this, it's sending out a real MAC address. If you do anything on your phone, it sends a real MAC address. If it polls for Wi-Fi, if it polls for email, it'll send out a real MAC address. So there's a number of states where we're actually seeing the real ID. And for our frequency metrics, for our engagement metrics, and even for our accounts metrics, that's sufficient. Again, it would be something that would make life really difficult if we were focused on understanding what a single individual is doing. But when we're trying to understand what a large population of people is doing, it makes the data set noisier, but that's what we're good at cleaning up.
예. 또 질문 있으신 분? 저쪽에 한 분 계시.
안녕하세요. 저 다름이 아니라 저는 센서 설치하는 거에 대해서 좀 관심이 있습니다. 센서 설치할 때 그 매장으로 그러니까 뭐 택배나 뭐 그런 걸 보내서 설치를 하는 건지 아니면 하드웨어 파트너사에서 나가서 설치를 해주는 건지 이게 와이파이가 이런 공간에서 몇 대를 설치하냐에 따라서 수집 데이터량이 달라지는데 그런 부분에 대해서 좀 설명을 듣고 싶습니다.
Yeah, so for the most part, we're deploying using existing infrastructure. So we'll use the Wi-Fi that is in the location, and it'll just be a software update. In cases where there is no Wi-Fi, we have our own sensor. And at the beginning of the company, we had our own sensor that we deployed in a number of different ways. The quality of the Wi-Fi and the density of the installation will definitely change the type of data we get. So, and certain vendors have built proprietary tools to actually, make their analytics engine or make the data that they send us even more differentiated. So, for instance, Cisco has a product called the Managed Services Engine, which, in addition to the RSSI data which we need, they'll even send us lat longs, which of course makes our job a lot easier. And they say they can get it down to 3 meters accuracy, which is fairly accurate for our space. But yeah, a lot of it depends on which vendor it is, how dense the installation is for our installation. But I think the thing that's really different and really exciting about our product is you can deploy a whole chain of stores. And so let's put it this way. We had one of the larger retailers in the United States try and turn on our software right ahead of the holiday period, which is like right now. And once you get into the holiday period, you can't deploy any new technologies in the US. And they were able to turn on their whole chain, which is thousands of locations, in about 45 minutes, because it's all done centrally with just software. It's no new hardware. We're not wiring anything. We're using what's already there.
오케이. 예. 또 뭐 추가 질문 있으십니까? 예.
예, 말씀 잘 들었습니다. 요즘에 구글 애널리티스 같은 경우에도 이 유니버설 애널리티스로 업그레이드되면서 웹이랑 모바일뿐만 아니고 오프라인 데이터까지 수집 가능하게 되고 있고요. 그리고 어도비 쪽의 디지털 애널리티스 분석 툴 같은 경우에도 이미 온 오프라인이 통합되고 있잖아요. 근데 지금 유클리드 같은 경우에 일단 시작이 오프라인부터 시작해갖고 가는 것 같은데 제가 볼 땐 결국 둘 다 추구하는 방향이 같을 것 같아요. 그러면 누군가는 그쪽 시장에서 최종 승자가 될 것 같고 그럼 거기에 있어서 유클리드 같은 경우에는 그런 포지션을 취하기 위해서 어느 쪽에 노력을 경주하고 계신지 궁금합니다.
Sure. So we're primarily focused on the offline side of things. So our ambition is to be the largest offline analytics company. Of course, understanding how online and offline tie is a very, very valuable question. And in the online world right now, you have a number of different companies that have very rich data sets for their network, right? There's Google, there's Omniture, there's endless companies that have very, very rich data. I think what's really unique about Euclid is we're the only company with this large of a real-world behavioral data set. And so, for me, at this point, I don't think we are in competition with any of the online players. I think the big question of the next, couple of years is how can we understand how our networks intertwine, in a more concrete way. And I don't think that's going to be a challenge that any one company overcomes on their own. I think we partner with a number of companies to get that done.
예. 질문. 예. 제가 갖다 드릴게요.
네, 발표 감사드리고요. 몇 가지, 두세 가지 질문만 하고 싶습니다. 그 와이파이를 통해서 얻을 수 있는 정보가 와이파이 아이디는 아까 말씀하신 맥 어드레스 외에 또 다른 무엇이 있는지 첫 번째 궁금하고요. 두 번째로는 미국 같은 경우엔 커피숍에서 와이파이 아이디를 무작위로 추출하는 것들이 개인정보와 관련된 이슈가 있었던 걸로 들었는데 법적인 이슈는 없는지가 두 번째 질문이고요. 세 번째 질문은 단순히 그 사람들 숫자들을 관리한다면 여기서 어떻게 의미 있는 결과가 도출될 수 있는 건지가 궁금합니다. 예.
섹션 끝나고 출입하겠습니다. 지금 아직 섹션 진행 중이라서 섹션
Sure.
끝나고
So
출입하겠습니다.
I'll try and answer each question separately.
뒤에 분한테 말 좀 해주세요.
So the first question is, aside from the MAC address, what other information do we collect? And what I would say is Euclid very intentionally has limited the data we collect. So in terms of our privacy by design principles, what we've tried to do is only collect the data that we absolutely need to provide value to a retailer. So from a data collection perspective, what we get is very simple. We get the MAC address, the signal strength, the channel we found it on, and then we get some metadata about the location where we found it. So very, very simple. We don't collect very much. Privacy is a very important question in our space. And I'd say it's an important question both from a technical perspective, like doing the right thing, and from a communications and perspective. From a technical perspective, it's very simple, right? You limit the data you collect. You only share aggregate anonymous data, and you enable the consumer to easily opt out. And we've done all those things. We've always done those things. From a communications perspective, I think it's a more challenging issue, and it's about being very transparent about what you do and what you don't do. And for us, that's been a very big deal. I mean, we started the company when there was no rules around the space at all, and we were very careful and from a technical perspective, we haven't changed anything the way we do it. We've always been very, very conscientious about it. But we decided that it was actually very important that the space have clear rules and be very transparent about what it's doing, because the uncertainty scares consumers, the uncertainty scares retailers, our customers, and the uncertainty scares governments. and so we went about and created a code of conduct, which we brought in a number of different retailers. We brought in some competitors. We brought in government and said, okay, we just want to come up with here's where the line is. And at the end of it, we released it. It was broadly accepted by our space. It was endorsed by the FTC, and it was endorsed by one of the senators in the United States, Chuck Schumer. And I think for us, that approach of just leading head-on the issue and being transparent about what we do is the biggest way that you combat the uncertainty that you get from this being such a new space and a new technology.